Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you ever so much for joining. We're here today to talk about building human resilience in cybersecurity environments and the team crisis management of all of that. I'm joined here today by McKeown. McKeown is a chartered occupational psychologist, cyber crisis management specialist, and also a friend of mine. For the last 20 years, we've been working together in various guises, but also good friends. So I'm delighted to welcome you today, Beck, to this webinar. Really looking forward to it, and I'm hoping it will be fun for everybody to hear us and learn a bit about cybersecurity crisis management this morning. So obviously, we're going to go through various questions and some slides. There is a Q&A section in the chat if you want to add to that. And, you know, we'll take some, we'll try and answer some of those at the end as well. So, okay, let's get on.
Well, I'll just give you a bit of a intro as to why I'm here. I mean, as Mandy said, we've known and worked with each other for an awful long time. We're both psychologists, and my sort of area of expertise comes from all of the research that I've done with the military defence over the last 20 odd years. I'm very lucky to have had that experience, and I have learned a lot from it about how people behave in high risk, high pressure environments, and how we help them build their resilience through capability and confidence in those environments. As I say, most of my work has been with the Ministry of Defence, and I see an awful lot of parallels between defence and cybersecurity. And I don't mean just in terms of war fighting, but the levels of complexity and the challenges of working online are very similar underneath to some of the things, some of the challenges that presented people working in defence. So what my whole reason for building Mind Science was to bring all of that knowledge, research and experience into the cybersecurity domain, because it's quite a lot of tech-based solutions, and I think that the human has a bigger role to play than perhaps people realise, which is why I'm here today.
Yeah. And that's what really excites me as well. It's all about the human element of cybersecurity, because you know, I know a bit about cybersecurity. You know, we have to touch on it in our everyday lives and our work. But really, Becca, that's one of the things I want to ask you to really clarify from the beginning. What is cybersecurity? You know, and how does it play out in organisations? And what should we be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity for me, before I actually started working in the sector, is just like something that IT people do, and I had no interest in what it was. And I don't know anything about tech. I'm a bit useless with it. So what's it got to do with me? Over the years, I've become to realise that actually cybersecurity is everybody's business, whether we like it or not. In essence, it's about protecting systems and networks and data from digital attacks, theft and damage. And that's done by using tools, policies, practices, and it's all about safeguarding sensitive information, preventing unauthorised access, confidential integrity of data, and availability of resources. Because if somebody's going to go in and attack and damage your resources, then you can't use your data. And as we go through the presentation, I'll explain exactly what impact that can have on organisations. But it's also about maintaining trust with customers and stakeholders. So there's lots of different elements to cybersecurity and why it's important. When we talk about cybersecurity, we sometimes think it must be about tech companies, but it's actually not, because every organisation is a cybersecurity organisation. Tesco's, for example, is a cybersecurity organisation. Supermarkets have supply chains that are controlled by using digital assets. So, of course, if there's an interruption to that, then that means that you know, we're not going to have things on the shelves. Some sectors are more critical than others. Financial loss is a big issue. Think about the USS pensions debacle. Was that last year? Can't remember now. But certainly I had an invitation to join Equifax support programme because the USS pensions had compromise my data, and obviously that has a massive impact financially. Government, HMRC, Cabinet Office, for example, have all reported data breaches. And think of the news back in the summer of the NHS and the chaos that caused with one particular NHS trust in London. So that's why what cybersecurity is and why it's so important. And I think it matters more now than ever before, because everything that we do pretty much is now online. All our personal information, our financial, business information, it's all stored online. So that, to me, that's really what cybersecurity is all about.
Thank you, Beck. But so, I mean, it's obviously a big beast. There's lots to think about there. But, you know, why does cybersecurity matter? You know, what is the big issue here?
I think
let's get into that.
Yeah, well, there's lots going on, really, because evolving threat tactics is a big thing at the moment, and I think the advent of AI and how much that's exploded this year is causing problems when it comes to AI-driven attacks. I was reading last night about a thing, I'm going to say words I don't truly understand now, to be fair, polymorphic malware. So basically, AI drives the malware to react in different ways and attack from different angles, and it's super quick and super fast. And because it's AI driven, how do you even know where to start with stopping something like that? So this sort of the sophistication of attacks is getting very much bigger. People who attack, this is not always some sort of 16-year-old kid hacking in a bedroom. These are actually criminal gangs, and they're very sophisticated and very well organized. And they have tailored strategies targeting industries. You can even go and buy ransomware, so you can do your own attack. So this is big money, big business. I think there's also the issue of what we call an increased attack surface. Now, this was very prominent in the pandemic when everybody all of a sudden got a laptop and started working at home, because now you've got remote work. So you've got your systems are connected in people's houses to their personal systems, the cloud, Internet of Things. So there's an awful lot of places where an attack can enter your system now. So it's increased vulnerabilities, basically. The high speed of attacks is a massive issue because it is so quick, and it can escalate very, very rapidly. So your data can be exfiltrated from your system quicker than you perhaps realise. And there are severe consequences for that. I talked about business continuity, reputation, like I say, with the NHS and the USS examples, are good ones of that. And also legal and regulatory pressures. Now, there is a Digital Resilience Act coming for the financial sector, so it's actually becoming more and more important to have your legal and regulatory compliance sorted in this respect as well, because people are starting to realise that actually fines, legal action, stakeholder trust erosion, all of these things massively impact on the business. So it's becoming a bigger issue than we perhaps first realised. And if the regulators are interested, then organisations need to start becoming a little bit more interested.
This is why I'm really interested to work with you on this, Beck, because, Cognisco has been working with regulated organisations for many years now, dating back to, Network Rail and still to this day, some rail sector, finance, digging holes, all these risk areas where we have to be able to evidence that people know what they're doing. More crucially, they know what to do when crisis happens. So what we've been doing for many years lends itself very well to this particular area, cybersecurity. We've obviously been involved with information assurance type programs before, but this one really, really matters to me because there's a lot of psychology in the background. Both of us are psychologists, and that's probably why we're interested in the behaviour elements. So when we think about crisis security and response teams, and what is it we want to think about when it comes to the elements, and how does it break down? I've got a next slide, I think, is probably a good start to talk about this.
I think certainly from my perception, the essential elements of a cyber crisis response, everybody knows about your tech stack. So advanced detection systems, firewalls, all of that kind of thing. Then you've got the process. The National Cybersecurity Centre have some really good advice on how to develop cybersecurity incident response plans. There's even an international standard about cybersecurity response. So there's a lot of information out there about that provides organisations with a very structured way to detect, respond to, and then contain their incidents. Equifax was a pretty big thing back in 2017. They had a major breach, and it was due to a known vulnerability that wasn't patched in time. And a little lesson that I've learned from working in cybersecurity is when you get those annoying little things on your iPhone that say, update your thing, could you? That's where your patches are. You make sure you do them straight away, because, you know, there is a temptation to leave it, particularly if, like me, you've got a phone that's quite old and doesn't have enough space for it all. Anyway, I digress. It was a lack of robust response processes that ended up with Equifax having the problems they have. So big incidents like that are very well known, are very useful for everybody else to learn from. These tools and processes, for me, it's the first line of defence, and they give you the structure to work within, but they can detect anomalies, and protocols can help guide your actions, but they can't address the complexity and the nuance of a live crisis. And one example that I always use for this is not a cybersecurity one, it actually comes from the aviation industry. If you remember, quite a few years ago now, Captain Sullenberger landed his aircraft on the River Hudson in New York. And that was a fine example, because there was no protocol in the planet that said put your plane down on a river. But what he did was recognise the underlying elements of the situation. He couldn't land. He's over the busiest airspace on the globe. What he needs is a large flat area that's X amount of distance wide and so long. So what did he find? A river. And that to me was a really good example of how protocols don't always address the complexity and the nuance of the live situation.
I suppose there's a level of expertise there as well, isn't there, Beck? If you think about the levels of expertise, you know, from basic knowledge, we all have a basic knowledge about flying a plane, landing a plane, for example. But then, you know, upper level, you know, it's how you apply that knowledge. And then when you get to mastery, it's about being able to think outside the box to achieve what you need to achieve in that moment, but stay calm under pressure. It's all that. And that comes with experience and mastery. So it's how we can help people to gain that expertise and get to a point where they can master this stuff.
Yeah, and that sort of comes down to agile thinking skills and metacognition, but I'll come back to that in a little while. Those are two aspects of what we call cognitive readiness. And what cognitive readiness is a set of skills that helps you be flexible enough to handle complex challenges effectively. So the health and safety exec in Ireland back in 2021 had a ransomware attack, and they despite having all of those technical defences in place, they struggled because it just completely overwhelmed their response processes. So the people were overwhelmed. So that's a good example, really, of actually, even though you've got all the tech in place, if your people aren't ready and responsive and able to react flexibly, then it can still be a problem, despite the fact you've got all of the tech in place.
So we can have all of that technology in place, we can have all of our processes all in place, all nailed, all the human factors elements, and then but that relies on all the people, right? That relies on people following the process, understanding the training.
I think that's it, but there's also an awful lot more to this, and this is where I think the complexity comes in terms of psychology, as far as like we're concerned. And the things that I was thinking about this last night, I actually had to make some notes because there's so many things that are going on, so many human aspects of crisis response, like the complexity of threats that I was talking about earlier, and as well I've just explained with the Captain Sullenberger example. That's about being cognitively flexible. It's advanced problem solving skills. So what he was doing there was what we call pattern recognition. So how do you learn pattern recognition and look at the underlying problems that you come across when you're doing high stakes decision making. Analytical reasoning is another sort of part of thinking that is and becomes an agile thinking skill. Another problem that you've got is limited visibility. And if you ask anybody who works in cybersecurity, they will tell you that they're never really sure of the exact state of their organisation's assets. Because as I explained earlier, when everybody sort of goes offline, you've got third-party people working from home. You can never really be 100% sure of the state of what you've got. So situational awareness is the human aspect of the problem here. It's stress, as we discussed right at the start, leads to tunnel vision and cognitive narrowing. So you don't always, you can't always focus and concentrate and think properly at these sort of times. But also with situational awareness is a thing called anchoring. So it's a cognitive bias, and a cognitive bias is a shortcut the brain takes when it's got a huge amount of information to deal with. And anchoring means that you fix on the first piece of information that you come across, and then you make all of the decisions based on that one piece of information. Now, if you fixed on the wrong piece of information, then your decision making is going to be flawed from there on in. So that's quite important. I've talked about the rapidly evolving technology and rapidly evolving threats. So people need to have a curious mind and a continual learning and adaptability, a growth mindset, if you like, to be able to keep up with what's going on. And that's easier said than done, because you've got to balance building new skills and learning with a very, very busy day job. So how do you go about that? That's another human problem. The need to act quickly, and this is kind of what you were experiencing earlier. Time pressure can lead to stress-induced problems, like you couldn't get that the side deck up quick enough because of it, and that's not a you thing, that's a human thing. And also there's things like training for what we call recognition primed decision making. So there's lots of different types of decision making, and if you've got a lot of time and you're not under pressure, that is I can't think what it's called now. That's one type of decision making. But when you're under stress and it's busy, you need to use a different set of techniques for decision making, and that's called recognition primed. So again, psychology there has some input into how you behave and how you make decisions under high stress. Fear of blame. We all like to point the finger. There is a thing in cybersecurity where humans are always referred to as the weakest link, and that sort of drives me nuts, really, because that it's a blame culture, and it doesn't help, because people make defensive decision making in those sorts of circumstances, and fear of consequences will delay things like reporting. If you think that you're going to get a warning or even lose your job because you've made a mistake, you are going to do everything you need to cover that up. If you've got a just culture, where the prevailing culture is that errors are learned from, they're not there to beat people with. We need to know about them so we can learn from it. Learning from it means that we then can develop our systems and become safer. But there's always that blame fear that doesn't really help. Cross-departmental collaboration. I'm fairly sure we've all come across problems here. You're in a cross-departmental meeting, whether it's a cybersecurity crisis or not, and you will have different people from different groups have different priorities, and that can lead to conflict as to how you proceed in certain circumstances. When you're in a crisis, the last thing that you need is to have your teams arguing amongst themselves, because then they're not focusing on getting to the root cause of the problem. So again, that's something else that psychology can be useful for, is sort of teaching people how to get on and understand the perspectives of others. I found that interesting when I was teaching military people from special forces how to get on with people that they don't like in other countries, and I found that there are certain techniques that you can evolve that help you be able to put aside those inherent biases that we don't, about people who aren't like us, and actually work more effectively. So it's sort of bringing those principles in, I think, could be really useful in cybersecurity. And clear communication and external stakeholders kind of fall into the same thing, really. It's about how you frame your communications, you sort of how you present it to the outside world will very much depend on the reaction to it. And anybody who's been involved in this and has ever been, tried to cover something up will find they get caught. I mean, you see it all the time, don't you? When no, there's not having a crisis, and then 2 days later the newspapers have got hold of it, and all of a sudden it's out there, and you were not the one who's had control over that communication. So that's another interesting aspect of that. Honest strategic communication builds trust and credibility, and that's massively important when it comes to things like reputational damage. And also another sort of psychological aspect to that is one of emotional intelligence. So are you aware of your own emotions and the impact they have on other people? Because if you're frightening the life out of your team during a crisis because you're angry and shouting, then you're not going to get the best out of them. So there's an awful lot in there, but I think what I hope to have achieved by going through a few of those is to say that human problems are equally important to technology and process. Capability is people, process and technology. So if one of those things falls down, then you don't have a resilient system. And as I say, the focus generally is on the stuff, processes, technology, because we know what that is, we can understand it. Human beings add another dimension of uncertainty, and it's not something that everybody's comfortable with dealing with. But to me, it's massively important. And as it says on the slide there, human problems need human solutions. So that's where psychology comes in when it comes to crisis management in cybersecurity.
No, absolutely right. I mean, you touched on what happened to us prior to me joining this call. All the preparation in the world, practicing the run-throughs, getting the technology set up, camera set up, all ready, planned, organised.
Yeah,
I rock up, I turn my computer on, camera won't come on. So I went into panic mode. We've got like 3 minutes to go, no camera.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? And I started to panic, and I just could not think straight, Beck. So that was a really good example for me, how I know this stuff, I know what I need to do, but could I think in that minute, because of the time pressure, because of the panic, I was really so there was just such good timing to play out behaviourally, and that was just me. That was without other people in the team to deal with as well. So I guess knowing your team and knowing what they know and their levels of expertise and where they are is probably quite important, isn't it? It's part of your programme to develop people to be able to manage in a crisis. That's your expertise, and I think you're absolutely right. Human problems do need human solutions. So
I mean, just to sort of build on that a little bit, and it's sort of bringing an anecdote from somebody who worked for a massive telecoms company and had a cybersecurity attack, and she was actually responsible for global cybersecurity response teams. Right. She's been doing this for a lot of years, so she's a very, very capable person, calm under pressure, knows her stuff. This particular thing, I can't go into the details of it because it was sort of fairly high profile. It wasn't in the UK, it was in Europe. But she just said, because it was so high profile and so important, she said, it was really weird. I know what to do, but it's like I just didn't know what to do. And it really put a dent in her confidence. And it was a conversation that we had where I explained about how the brain works and all of the cognitive biases and that sort of thing. And actually she said, you know what, now I know that I'm just human, and it was okay. But she felt there was something wrong with her because all of a sudden all of that experience just drained out of her brain when she needed it most. And I think that even understanding how the brain works, then when that happens, you at least know what's happening to you, and you know then how to put it right.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got where did all this start to become important? I think there's the key case study that you wanted to just run through of what why we all worry about this now and how it really came to its own.
Yeah, there was this NotPetya, all cyber attacks have a name, a bit like storms, really, back in 2017. It absolutely crippled a whole bunch of international organisations, one of them being Maersk Shipping. Within hours, their entire network was brought down. So can you imagine the amount of ships that they have around the world, and you lose your situational awareness of what's going on? You just can't operate. The consequences of that for your customers, for your stakeholders, for your shareholders is massive. So the initial technical response just didn't contain the threat. But actually what saved them was the team's cognitive readiness. So as you can see on there, rapid and efficient decision making. They were very adaptable. They communicated well between themselves as well as externally, and remained calm under pressure. And because of that, they were able to rebuild their network in 10 days, which is a phenomenal feat. And to me, that's a really good example of why tech is useful, but people are so necessary. There was an attack I was aware of, won't mention any names, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now. It took 10 months to get the systems back and everything running up and running. So to do something like that in 10 days, it really is truly incredible. So all of those human skills, the psychology of people, was absolutely crucial during that response. So if you're practicing and developing those skills constantly, then you're going to be better prepared to act, to adapt, and lead effectively when a cyber crisis does hit. And it is about when it hits and not if these days. And the other thing that's just sort of popped into my mind there when we talk about practicing and developing skills is that at Cranfield we did some research into skill fade. And what we found is that if you're not exercising decision making and procedural skills at a minimum every 8 weeks, they're not maintained at a gold standard. So there has to be a balance between, you can't send everybody on a training course every 8 weeks, but there are other ways of learning to try and keep that up. And I think we've all probably had the experience where you've been on a training course and then you get back to work and it's like, oh, I haven't used it for 6 months and now I come to this system and you know what, all that training's just gone out of my head. And that is because of skill fade. So again, that's another thing that psychology, I think, can help with cybersecurity and keeping people's skills at a peak.
Great. Super.
So what are those skills? This is what I call cognitive readiness, and this is the concept that I came across when I was doing research for all those courses that I taught for the Ministry of Defence.
Yeah.
And there's a number of cognitive readiness is sort of like the basis of that, but I've kind of expanded on that a little bit with some other things that I came across in my research. But it all boils down to 4 pillars, really. So it's about having an adaptive mindset. I spoke earlier about curiosity and continuous learning, and that is so important. But also a thing called metacognition. So that's reflecting on what you know. So what, becoming reflective in your practice when you learn something. What have you learned? What does that mean? How would you do things differently next time? And also being very honest with yourself about the level of skills that you have and being open-minded to learn from others. So that's an adaptive mindset. That's really important. Agile thinking skills. This is the thing I was talking about earlier with Captain Sullenberger. You've got recognition, prime decision making. You've got organisational strategic decision making. There's lots of different ways of thinking. And it's the ability to toggle between them, but also to know when to switch from one to another. So that's what we call agile thinking. Agile people skills, this comes from my special forces work, because it's about how to understand what makes other people tick. And if you can understand that and what's driving and motivating them, you know then how to work, how to behave with them, how to communicate with them, and get the best out of them across a range of situations. That's really important. Anybody will tell you, well, we've all been in meetings where somebody talks and everybody rolls their eyes. Not very helpful, not very effective, and actually we're probably not learning when we haven't got diversity of thought in the room. So again, those people skills, massively important. And then it's about bringing all of those things together to work as a team. High performing teams, it's about accountability. It's about understanding what makes teams work together effectively and then creating the right culture for that to flourish. And I think psychological safety is something I see mentioned an awful lot. It's all over LinkedIn all the time. What does that actually mean? It means that people can actually speak out, they can ask the stupid question, they can feel free to admit that they don't know something they need to learn, but knowing that they can do that in an environment where nobody's going to laugh at them, nobody's going to think worse of them. We're all here to learn from each other. So all of this stuff, obviously I've done a lot of research into this. I'm very passionate about it, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. But then, I guess, how do you know what skills people in your team have? What are their strengths? What are their development needs? And what does that spread of skills look like across a particular team? And this is where we had that conversation a few months ago, and you've kind of got the answer to that.
Yeah, thank you, Beck. Hopefully. No, that's really, really fascinating stuff. Lovely to see the 4 pillars there all in place. But there's obviously a lot that underpins those 4 pillars. And you're absolutely right. How can we start to help a program like yours? Because let's face it, Cognisco aren't subject matter experts in everything. We play in all sorts of different sectors. We support lots of different programs, and we have some quite weighty customers and weighty partners, and that we support because we've got something that can help the bigger program, the bigger transformation stuff, and support the training initiatives. But where do we start? So you need a baseline, really. If you want to demonstrate impact of a program, it's probably best to have some sort of measure to start with, identify where there's some gaps from a skills perspective, but also in order to behave correctly when it matters, you really do need to at least have some knowledge and understanding. You do need to be able to apply the knowledge that you've learned through training, and you need a level of confidence in which to act. So what we try to do with our situational judgment assessments, and we feel that this would be great to help measure cognitive readiness, is to create some situational judgment assessments with confidence that allows you to identify those employees that understand what they should know, more crucially what they don't understand, so you can help remediate that gap before it really happens, but also identify misunderstanding by their own admission as well. By asking them how confident they are in their answers, that can help give us a good indicator of whether they're likely to behave appropriately when it matters in the situation. But also this gives them a chance to practice the scenario before they really have to be forced to, so that if they recognize it, obviously we talked about this the other day, when we can't possibly assess for every single situation that will come up, but we can assess whether they've got the right skills and knowledge and understanding, as well as confidence to act when it matters, right?
Yeah, and that also, I think, sort of plays into the pattern recognition thing. So it's a worthwhile exercise doing it in that way, because you're kind of learning by stealth, if you like.
Yeah. So I suppose it's probably pertinent at this stage just to really bring to life what's different about this Cognisco assessment of ours. That's a situational judgment multiple response question with confidence. So what you see on the screen right now is a multiple choice question, and we're not that. A multiple choice question at best will help you pass a test, because you've just had some training. You can go through the training and you might be able to select the one right answer. And you select the wrong right answer, not necessarily because you know what to do in a situation, just because you remember it from the training. Or you might guess by eliminating the ones that are obviously wrong, and then take a final stab at the last 2. Well, that looks about right. And also the longest response quite often is the right one, because
that reminds me actually of I did a piece of research where I evaluated some mandatory training for the military. And we were looking at, I think it was equality and diversity. And it's right. That one, I don't know if you've seen on the internet, there's sort of a meme that's got the pig from Toy Story just going as fast as you can, pressing the button to get through the mandatory training. And it was like that. And one of the candidates actually turned around and said, "Oh, this is easy. Just pick the most legal sounding one." So what am I assessing here? Because it's not their ability or their understanding or their need to actually behave in a way that's, you know, supportive to equality and diversity. You're just testing their ability to recognise the answer in a question. That's nothing, is it?
That's right. That's right. So I mean, so you can see the structure of this question. It has a stem and it has multiple choice, and you pick the one you think is right. And yes, absolutely right, Beck. There's many different strategies that we could use, and we know from psychology and from our own days at the university, we could pass a test without doing too much revision, because you just got to use your common sense. Select the one that looks about right, and again, the longest response, or like you say, the one that sounds the most technical and the most difficult to write in the first place. It's probably the right one. Use that strategy, you probably pass. Not that we should be telling you that, guys. So what's different? So this is just I've had to chop it in half because it's quite a big question on screen. You'd scroll down and use it more sensibly, but we still have a stem. And that stem can be as complex or as simple as you like. So we could create some sort of situational scenario, give them some context. And this is the powerful thing about the assessments that we build. We build them with customers. Sometimes we build off-the-shelf assessments that can be really reasonably translated to other organisations, but 9 times out of 10 you need some contextually relevant scenarios to that organisation, and so some tweaks here and there can make that happen too. But here you have a stem, and the difference here is that you are asked to respond to each and every response in its own right. So immediately you get so many different assessment points. You can assess lots of different things about that same topic all in one go. In many different ways. So here we're asking you to say, well, what do? Do you agree or disagree with this statement? You're going to immediately do that. Yes, I agree, or no, I don't agree. And then you're asked how confident you are that that's the right answer, or that that's what you would do, depending on how the questions are written, of course. You also have the option to say, I don't know. And that is actually quite important when you think about how behaviour works in reality. If we don't know, we don't know, and we just decide to guess anyway and go with it, that in reality could cause us a problem. That would flag risk to us. We prefer people to admit that they don't know, because we can do something with that, right? We can do something immediately. If you don't know, here's what you need to know. So that's the structure of our question. And I know there's some cybersecurity experts on the call. Please don't nitpick at the question. This is just an example on the screen to show the art of the possible. Okay, so what do you get from that then to work with individuals, first of all? So an individual will get a report, and this is just a snapshot of one of the graphs from our wonderful reports. Here you get a measure of your understanding, your answers at the time, whether you scored quite highly, so you can be confident that you know and you're likely to do the right thing. I've put a little legend in the corner there so you can see that ideally we want people to be confidently knowledgeable, able to then apply what they've learned in reality. So you can see the score there, accountability and ownership. They've achieved the benchmark in that with a good level of confidence. So green star, great, they're good to go. But there's some gaps there. There's some training gaps there. But then there's interesting ones where you've got a good level of understanding, but you're not so confident. Why aren't you confident in that knowledge? So if you're not confident in a bad situation, you're going to listen to other people rather than trust your gut and your instinct. Because, you know, that's how it plays. You get the people who are strong but wrong, I like to call them. These are the people who had come out with a red category. The red category is somebody who scored less than 50% in their answers, so they really didn't know their stuff at all, but they were highly confident in their answers at the time.
Unconscious incompetence, I think that's called, isn't it?
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. So we're trying to identify that, and also, you know, the way this report plays out for the individual is obviously they can then start to see and appreciate why they might need to be on the training, because let's face it, quite often they don't know what they don't know. And there's obviously hubris involved sometimes, they're overly confident. So, the Dunning-Kruger effect we've talked about before, another psychological term, we won't go into it too much, but basically an overconfidence in your own ability. And that plays out quite well. Have you got anything to say about that?
It's that the underconfidence in your ability that's going to make it, that's going to impact your decision making. You're going to falter, and then, like you say, if you're under pressure, even more likely then to be impacted by that cognitive narrowing, because you don't have confidence in your own ability. So how do you then build that confidence? And imposter syndrome. Oh, this is why I love this stuff. There's just so much, isn't there?
There's so much in there. Once you get under the bonnet, there's so much psychology in there too, and it's great. But everyone's psychologists, really. That's so they say, but they are. I mean, we all look at behaviour and how things play out, and most of us are genuinely interested in why that played out in that way, and what can we do to prevent it again. But this is helpful to give us an indicator of what they do and don't know. But your training
structure again, isn't it? We all like structure. That's another bias. So to make things into a form that's understandable is just brilliant. This is my favourite slide.
I agree. It's my favourite too. And the reason I think we like it is because it's got lots of pretty colours. But also what this does is it gives you a view of your team. So, particularly with crisis response team management, you want to see the whole team, what they do and don't know. So here's the average score of the team. Now, the red triangle there is interesting that you see in the middle of the screen there, because that's if you wanted to benchmark your team against everyone else in the organisation or other teams in the organisation, or even broader than that. You could have a level of benchmarking where your team sit relative to them. It's just interesting data, really. But then, what you get here is a high-level stakeholder view, justification for why you need to do training in certain topics, why you need to focus on some areas but not others. If you've got an area that you've smashed it and there's no training need required, why waste time and energy? Just give them some reminder stuff to do, and they're good to go, really. But this is where, go on.
That's massive in cybersecurity, because there's an awful lot of things going on about cybersecurity awareness training, and the realization is dawning that one size doesn't fit all, and that tailoring training is better for the people because they're only learning something they need to know, but also cost effective, much better return on investment for something like that than just making everybody mandatory training. It just should be banned. It really should, because it doesn't do what it says on the tin. And I think this is one way. This again plays into all of the research that I've done for how military do their training and evaluating that, because there's no point in wasting your money training everybody on everything when they don't need to know it. And if you stick the word mandatory in front of it, you're pretty much wasting your money anyway, because people don't engage with it.
Yeah. So this helps highlight that. Yeah, absolutely. But it helps highlight that to the stakeholders, the managers, the trainers, but also the individuals themselves, where they've got some gaps, why they need to be here, etc. So I like this one because it's got the heat map. You can see where your hotspots are. So focus on those first. It's high risk people. They don't know it, and they're highly confident, so they're likely to do the wrong thing.
Also, caveat, if you don't put that slide up on a thing in front of the whole team, that would be a bad thing.
Well, that's right. Use the data sensitively and wisely. And it's appropriate. People have the appropriate permissions to see that sort of thing, don't they?
Yeah.
But how this plays out over time is if you've got a baseline measure in the first place. So typically our research shows that 20% of people are optimal, but there's a big 50% of knowledge gaps and 30% really didn't know. So 80% of people have got some remediation work to do. But over time, then you reassess them later on. You can see the shift of moving people from, relatively high risk and misunderstanding to reducing that gap significantly, almost half the risk and misunderstanding. We went from 30% right down to 5% with a particular group I'm thinking of. And this is just an example of evidence-based solutions and the impact of the programme itself. I know we're running very low on time, so I'm going to skip to our very last slide, really, that's just as a summary. So from my perspective, I can help manage cyber risk teams by identifying the areas that you could work with, Beck, evidencing their likely behaviour, but also to help demonstrate ROI to the customers where it matters. But you're the expert. So what are the benefits of something like this and the whole programme from your perspective as well?
Well, I think for me, there's so many. It's all about minimising the damage from any cyber attacks. It's about reducing your financial losses, protecting reputation, all of those sort of good things that we talked about earlier on in the presentation. But I think for me, it's about enhancing learning opportunities, because if you learn the right things in the right way at the right time, you are so much more effective. It's real-time insights into vulnerabilities and attack tactics. It's improving your future defences, because you're doing the what we call after action review in military, but post-incident analysis, how to learn from that. It's improving team confidence, and as you've just demonstrated there, confidence is massively important to understand, because you've got the overconfidence or the underconfidence, both equally risky, I guess. And also, I think it reduces the stress of the team. If we all know that we can rely on each other, then you've got each other's backs. That's massive improving for confidence, but also morale. I think also being resilient and agile as an organisation is great. You've built trust in your security processes and your incident response plans, but also reinforces the security culture throughout the organisation. And when it comes down to it, we all want to know how that impacts on the bottom line, because that's why businesses are in business. It gives you a competitive advantage, I think. Your organisation is positioned, you're proactive, you're resilient, and it really enhances your reputation. And that, I think, these days when data causes so much risk, is hugely important. So it's not always easy to see the bottom line when it comes to psychology and the impact, because it's always one step removed. But for me, I think that it's clear that taking care of your systems, your technology, your processes, and your people is definitely going to enhance that bottom line. Why wouldn't you? She says.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? So I don't know if we've had any questions throughout the chat. I must confess I haven't managed to keep an eye on the chat. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has put questions or not.
No questions yet, but it looks like we've got some coming up.
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, I'm sorry we are running slightly over, guys, but I'm happy to stay if you are. Beck, you're happy to stay?
Yep, I'm good.
I'll speak on your behalf. But so let's have a look. I think everyone has sound. Okay, so Sharon Calder, thank you for joining us, Sharon. Thank you for this webinar. I am a cyber psychology student. How would I work in, hang on, sorry, I've lost her. How would I work in cybersecurity, focusing on the human elements? Beck, I guess that's one for you.
Yeah, I think for me, and I'm sort of very education focused, I think that certainly for me, a psychology degree was very helpful. And there are now, you can get cyber psychology degrees. So if you wanted to specialise in it, then that would be the way forward. The British Psychological Society have verified courses. Amanda and I have both done one. And if you want to be a practitioner and have that sort of chartered psychology mark, then that would be the way forward. Having said that, if you don't want to do the university route, then most big organisations now have security awareness programs that you can work in. And so you could actually go and get on the job training and work in a department for that. Particularly, certainly you do that in government. And I know that big organisations like Tesco's and NatWest and Lego all have cyber psychology people working within them. So I think it just depends on whether you want to go the academic route or you want to learn on the job, but you can do both. And I think for me, the best thing to do is to start going to cybersecurity events and start networking and getting to know some people, learning some things through that route. I know that I get approached frequently by students asking if they can have a chat, or what do I do my master's thesis on? So people are always willing to help. Get out there, get networking, look and see who you're following on LinkedIn, who's of interest, and drop them a note, because 9 times out of 10, I'll bet you they'll quite happily have a chat.
Thank you, Beck. I'm sure Sharon will appreciate that advice. It's very good advice. I guess we could throw it out there if anyone has got any questions that they would like. If not, we can call it a wrap, guys.
Yep, if you think of anything, you've got our details there, and I'm quite happy to have a chat, drop us an email, and we can get back to you if there's anything you think about, because for me it's always like 20 minutes later, or you're on the train on the way home, you think, oh yeah, I forgot to ask that, or I didn't think about that. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch.
Yeah,
whenever.
Absolutely. Likewise, it equally goes to me. Happy to speak to any of you afterwards. Keep in touch. Thank you all very much for joining. Very much appreciated. And I look forward to sharing more of this webinar later.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.